She called me bitter. She called me jealous. But when she raised her hand against me, I called the police, and that changed everything. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe before we begin. And tell me, from which city are you listening to my story? I love seeing how far my words travel. I never imagined that a quiet Tuesday morning in October could change the very foundation of how I understood family, love, and loyalty. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 64 years old, a widow, and I live in a modest 2-story home just outside of Columbus, Ohio. For 30 years, I worked as a bookkeeper at a local firm, and even now in retirement, I still take part-time shifts because I like the order of numbers, the balance of columns, the way truth is revealed when accounts are checked twice. My house, the one I'm sitting in as I tell you this story, was paid off brick by brick, month by month, over 3 decades of hard work. I planted roses in the front yard and lavender along the back fence because their colors and scents remind me that life can still be sweet, even after loss. My husband passed away 5 years ago, and since then I have learned to live quietly, making do with my pension, Social Security, and the little I earn from working part-time. My pride, the center of my heart, has always been my son Mark. He is 35, works in logistics, dependable, thoughtful. When he was a boy, he used to sit beside me at the kitchen table and help me balance the checkbook, counting the coins with careful little fingers. After his father died, he hugged me in the church parking lot and promised, "Mom, I'll always take care of you." I believed him with all my soul. 3 years ago, Mark married Brianna. She was stunning from the first day I met her. Long blonde hair, designer handbags, shoes with heels that clicked like she owned every room she entered. I wanted to be supportive, to welcome her, because Mark's happiness was my happiness. Yet I couldn't ignore the way her eyes lingered not on people but on things, on furniture, on cars, on jewelry. She spoke often about standards and deserving the finer things, words that didn't sit easily with my Midwestern sense of living within one's means. Still, I bit my tongue. Isn't that what mothers do? For the sake of peace? On that Tuesday in October, I was out in the garden trimming the last of my roses. The air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot, the sky painted in that pale blue that only autumn seems to know. I heard the sound of a car pulling into my driveway. It was Mark's SUV. That was not unusual. He visited sometimes before work, but this time the slam of the doors carried an urgency I felt in my bones. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked toward the front. To my surprise, beside Mark stood Brianna with 2 large suitcases at her feet. An Uber driver was unloading even more luggage from the trunk. My son's face was drawn, his tie crooked, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Brianna, on the other hand, looked as though she had stepped straight from a magazine cover, hair flawless, nails polished, an outfit that probably cost more than my monthly groceries. "Mom?" Mark said, his voice strained. "We need to talk." Something inside me tightened. I led them inside, the weight of their footsteps echoing across my hardwood floor. Brianna's eyes darted around my living room, appraising the sofa, the framed photographs, even the curtains, as though she were tallying up a list in her mind. Mark sat down heavily in his father's old recliner, the one chair I had never moved since my husband passed. Brianna remained standing, arms folded, lips pursed. I poured myself coffee, steadying my hands, though my chest felt tight. "I'm listening," I said. Mark hesitated, glanced at his wife, then spoke. "We sold the house." The words hung in the air like smoke. My heart thudded. "Which house?" "Our house on Maple Street," he said. I felt as though the ground shifted beneath me. That house was not just their home. It was where I had invested $40,000 of my retirement savings to help them with the down payment. I had spent weekends painting walls, planting shrubs, fixing gutters. It was supposed to be their forever home, the place where they'd raise children. You sold it? My voice was thin. Why didn't you tell me? Brianna spoke for the first time, her tone cool and dismissive. We didn't need permission, Evelyn. It was our house. I understand it was legally yours, I said carefully. But you told me you planned to stay there long term. You said it was perfect for raising a family. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Plans change, Mom, I asked, almost whispering. How much did you sell it for? $620,000, Brianna answered, her voice tinged with triumph. The number hit me like a blow. $620,000, more than I earned in my last decade of work combined. My breath caught, but I forced myself to remain calm. That's quite a sum, I said. So where are you moving now? Did you find another place? Silence. Mark stared at his hands. Brianna inspected her nails. Finally, Mark said softly, We were hoping to stay here for a while, just temporarily. Stay here? I repeated, as though I had misheard. It would only be for a few months, he rushed to explain. Until we figure things out, we won't be any trouble. But what about the money from the sale? I asked, heart pounding. Brianna smoothed her skirt and said casually, I had expenses. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Expenses? Yes, personal things. Jewelry, clothes, a spa retreat in California with my sister. I also paid off my credit cards, and I invested $300,000 in my friend's boutique. I felt my stomach lurch. $300,000? She nodded, smiling faintly, as though expecting applause. At that moment, I understood. This was not about temporary setbacks. This was recklessness, entitlement, a deliberate squandering of resources. My son had allowed his future to be drained away, and now they stood in my living room expecting me to house them as though nothing had happened. If only I had known then what secrets I would uncover in the days to come. Secrets that would make this revelation seem almost trivial. Secrets that would shatter the fragile illusion I still held about my son's marriage and force me to make choices I never thought a mother would have to make. What I discovered next made me realize the $620,000 was only the beginning of the nightmare. I sat frozen in my own living room, the steam from my coffee curling into the silence between us. $620,000. Gone. The numbers raced through my head faster than I could process. My son, my careful, responsible boy who once balanced coins on the kitchen table to help me reconcile the checkbook, now sat slouched in his father's chair, silent, letting his wife do all the talking. I wanted to ask him, Where did you go, Mark? Where is the boy I raised? But before the words left my lips, Brianna cut in sharply. It's not your business, Evelyn, she said, leaning back against the mantel, as though she already owned the house. The money was ours, and we decided how to use it. You should be glad we're here. Families should support each other. Something inside me snapped. For decades I had sacrificed so that Mark could have more. Skipped vacations, patched old clothes, taken extra bookkeeping clients. I had poured my energy into teaching him the value of responsibility, of honesty, of work. And now his wife, who had never lifted a finger to earn a paycheck since marrying him, stood in my living room demanding shelter after burning through more money than I had seen in my lifetime. It became my business the moment you showed up at my door with suitcases, I said evenly. Mark lifted his head, eyes red, weary. Mom, please don't make this harder than it has to be." Harder? The word echoed in my ears. Wasn't it already hard enough to watch my son unravel before me? I rose slowly, setting my coffee cup on the table. "You had a home, you had money, and now you're asking me, your 64-year-old mother, to clean up the mess you allowed. No." The word sliced through the air, sharp and final. Brianna's eyes widened. For the first time, her flawless mask cracked. "Excuse me?" "You cannot stay here," I repeated. Mark stood quickly, panic flashing in his face. "Mom, we don't have anywhere else to go." "What about her family?" I asked, looking directly at Brianna. "They don't have space," Mark muttered. I turned back to her. "Didn't you redecorate your sister's house? Surely she can make room for you after the money you spent." Brianna's face twisted with anger. "My relationships with my family are none of your concern." "Everything became my concern the moment you stepped onto my porch with luggage," I said firmly. "And I will not allow you to live here and continue this recklessness under my roof." Her voice rose, shrill now. "You don't understand, Evelyn. You've lived in this tiny house your whole life, driving the same old car, wearing the same outdated clothes. You have no idea what it means to have standards. Mark deserves more than this boring, miserable existence." The insult struck deep, but I refused to let it show. "Maybe I don't have your kind of standards, Brianna, but I know what it means to live within my means, to earn what I have, and to respect other people's sacrifices. That's something you clearly never learned." Mark rubbed his temples, muttering, "Please, both of you." But Brianna wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her eyes flashing with fury. "You bitter old woman," she spat. "You're jealous that Mark chose me. He loves me more than he'll ever love you. That's what you can't stand." I drew a sharp breath. I had endured many things in my life. Long hours, widowhood, scraping by to make ends meet. But never had anyone spoken to me in such a cruel, deliberate way in my own home. "That's enough," I said, my voice low, steady. But Brianna wanted a spectacle. She stormed toward the front door and yanked it open. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with the quiet sounds of autumn. Leaves rustling, someone mowing their lawn, Mrs. Patterson watering her chrysanthemums across the street. Brianna stepped onto the porch, her voice ringing loud enough for the whole block to hear. "Do you all see what kind of woman Evelyn Carter really is? She's throwing out her own son, her own flesh and blood." Heads turned. Neighbors paused mid-task, their eyes drawn to the commotion. "Stop it, Brianna," Mark pleaded. "No," she cried, real tears streaming now, tears I knew were calculated. "Everyone should know the truth. We sold our house, we're in trouble, and his heartless mother slammed the door in our faces." I felt my cheeks flush with humiliation. My quiet street, where I had built respect over decades, was now a stage for her performance. "That's enough," I said, stepping out onto the porch, and then it happened. Brianna's hand shot up and struck me across the face. The crack of the slap echoed down the street like a gunshot. My head jerked back, and for a moment the world blurred. The sting burned hot on my cheek, but the deeper pain was the shock that she had crossed this line in front of my neighbors, in front of my son. Gasps erupted. Mrs. Patterson's hand flew to her mouth. The Johnson boy across the way shut off his mower, staring. Even Brianna seemed stunned by what she had done, her chest heaving, her hand still raised. I looked at Mark, my son, my boy, waiting for him to defend me, to say something, to do anything. He only stood there, lips parted, eyes wide, paralyzed. The silence was deafening. I touched my burning cheek, my voice steady though my heart thundered. "Did you just hit me?" Brianna lifted her chin defiantly. "You deserved it." Neighbors whispered, watching. Even the mailman stopped at the corner, leaned out of his truck. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Make me," she sneered. I pulled my phone from my pocket, dialing 911 with shaking hands. My voice did not falter when I spoke to the dispatcher. "This is Evelyn Carter. I've just been assaulted at my home by my daughter-in-law. Please send officers immediately." Brianna's smirk faded. Fear flickered in her eyes. Mark finally stirred, panic in his voice. "Mom, you didn't—" "Yes, I did," I said firmly, "and I will press charges." For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of power. Not revenge, not cruelty, but the clear certainty that boundaries must be drawn, even with your own flesh and blood. And in that moment, as neighbors stared and Brianna fumed, I realized this was only the beginning. I thought the slap was the lowest point, but the real betrayal I uncovered next would make that humiliation seem small. The sound of sirens has a way of changing the air. Even before the flashing lights turned down my quiet street, I could feel every neighbor standing taller, leaning closer, watching as though our cul-de-sac had been transformed into a courtroom. The hum of everyday life, lawnmowers, leaf blowers, children's laughter, stopped cold. All eyes were on my front porch. I stood on the wooden boards, cheeks still burning, phone still clutched in my hand. Beside me, Brianna's eyes darted between the approaching patrol car and the crowd of neighbors gathering across lawns. Her bravado faltered, but only for a second. She adjusted her blouse, smoothed her hair, and straightened her shoulders, as if preparing for a stage performance. Mark hovered behind her, pale, eyes flicking nervously between me and his wife. I wanted him to speak, to step forward, to claim his voice, but he said nothing. My son looked like a man caught in a rip current, pulled further from shore with every second of silence. The cruiser rolled to a stop, red and blue lights washing over the white siding of my house. 2 officers emerged. A young woman with dark hair pulled into a neat bun, and a tall man with graying temples. Their names, stitched onto their uniforms, read Martinez and Thompson. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said gently, stepping toward me. "You're the caller?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm Evelyn Carter. This woman," I pointed to Brianna, "struck me across the face in front of multiple witnesses." Gasps rippled through the gathered neighbors, as though the accusation, though already witnessed, gained weight by being spoken aloud. Officer Thompson turned his sharp gaze to Brianna. "Ma'am, is this true?" Brianna let out a laugh, high and brittle. "This is ridiculous. She's my mother-in-law. Families argue. It wasn't an assault. It was barely a tap." "Assault is assault," Martinez said firmly. "Family or not." Brianna's eyes narrowed, and I saw the mask slip again just for an instant. Behind the glossy exterior was something cold and calculating. "Mrs. Carter," Thompson asked, "are you seeking to press charges?" The question hung heavy. My cheek throbbed, but the greater ache was deeper, the realization that my son, the boy I raised, had stood silent while his wife humiliated me in front of half the neighborhood. I glanced at Mark, hoping for what exactly? An apology? Outrage? Something. But he looked at the ground, shoulders sagging. "Yes," I said finally. "I want to press charges." Brianna's mouth dropped open. "You can't be serious," she hissed. "Oh, I am," I replied, surprising even myself with the calm in my tone. "You crossed a line, and there are consequences." Martinez nodded, pulling out a small notebook. "We'll need your statement, Mrs. Carter, and we'll also take statements from the witnesses." Mrs. Patterson, bless her heart, stepped right up from across the street. "I saw the whole thing, officer. That girl slapped Evelyn plain as day. Others murmured their agreement. The Johnson boy, still clutching his mower handle, nodded solemnly. Even the mailman raised his hand. Brianna's face turned crimson. This is insane. They're all taking her side. Thompson stepped forward. Ma'am, you'll need to come with us. The look Brianna shot me could have cut glass. Mark, she shrieked. Are you just going to stand there? He stammered, his words tangled. Brianna, maybe you should just go with them for now. Her eyes widened in disbelief. You coward. The officers guided her toward the patrol car. She twisted to glare at me one last time. You'll regret this, Evelyn, she spat. You think you've won, but you've only made me stronger. The door slammed, and the cruiser pulled away, leaving silence in its wake. Neighbors dispersed slowly, some giving me sympathetic pats on the arm, others whispering to each other as though the entire street had shifted on its axis. When the last of them had gone, only Mark and I remained on the porch. He still wouldn't look me in the eye. Mom, he whispered, did you really have to call the police? The sting of his words cut deeper than the slap. Yes, Mark, I did. She assaulted me in front of half the neighborhood, and you stood there and did nothing. His face crumpled, shame and confusion warring in his eyes. She's my wife. I couldn't. You could have, I interrupted. You just didn't. We stood in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he dragged his suitcase back to the SUV. Where will you go? I asked quietly, the mother in me still reaching for him even as my pride screamed for distance. I don't know, he muttered. Maybe a motel. With what money? I pressed. He didn't answer. He only climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away, leaving me alone on the porch, the autumn air colder than before. That night, after giving my statement at the police station, I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. The house felt emptier than it had since my husband died. My cheeks still ached, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I pulled open the drawer of my filing cabinet and retrieved a folder labeled Mark's House Purchase. Inside were the documents I had almost forgotten. The promissory note, the lien, the legal safeguards my attorney had insisted on when I gave Mark and Brianna the $40,000 for their down payment. At the time, I had resisted. He's my son, I had told the attorney. I don't want him to feel like I don't trust him. But Mark himself had insisted. Mom, I want to pay you back. Let's make it official. And now, 3 years later, he had sold the house without repaying me, without even mentioning it. My fingers trembled as I traced the signatures on the paper. My husband's death had taught me one painful lesson. Life doesn't give second chances to those who refuse to act. I thought of Brianna's smirk, the slap, my son's silence. I thought of the neighbor's eyes on me as if waiting to see whether I would crumble. No, I would not crumble. The next morning, I called my attorney, James Crawford, and scheduled an appointment. For the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me that was stronger than sorrow. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was resolve. And I knew, deep in my bones, that what had happened on my porch was only the beginning of a battle that would test every ounce of strength I had left. I thought pressing charges would end the chaos. But when I learned what Brianna had really done with the $620,000, I realized the worst was still to come. The next morning, I dressed more carefully than I had in years, a navy skirt suit that had hung in my closet since my husband's funeral, polished flats, a string of simple pearls. My reflection in the mirror startled me, older than I remembered. Yes, with lines etched deep around my eyes, but also steadier, harder. I was no longer the woman who baked pies for church picnics and avoided conflict at any cost. I was someone who had been slapped on her own porch and who had decided enough was enough. James Crawford's law office sat in an old brick building downtown, just 2 blocks from the courthouse. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of leather and old books. The receptionist, a brisk woman in her 50s, greeted me warmly, as though she already knew my story. Perhaps she did. Small towns have long ears. James himself was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the presence of a man who had spent decades balancing kindness with steel. When he rose to shake my hand, his grip was firm, his eyes clear. "Mrs. Carter," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his heavy oak desk. "I'm sorry we meet under such circumstances." I sat, smoothing my skirt. "You handled the closing papers when Mark bought his house," I began. My voice wavered only slightly. "You remember?" "I do," he said with a nod. "You contributed a substantial sum toward the down payment. 40,000, if I recall." "Yes, and you insisted on a promissory note. At the time, I thought it unnecessary. But Mark agreed. He said he wanted it to be official. You also filed a lien against the property." James leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "And now the house has been sold." "Yes," I whispered, "for $620,000, without repaying me a cent." For a long moment he said nothing, letting the weight of my words settle. Then he reached for a legal pad. "Mrs. Carter, you understand that this is more than a family dispute. This is a breach of contract and, because of the lien, a conversion of secured property. You have legal recourse." My breath caught. "Legal recourse?" "You can sue for repayment of the loan, plus accrued interest, plus damages, plus attorney's fees." He adjusted his glasses. "Based on the note, interest compounded annually at 5%. You are owed approximately $47,000 today. Add legal fees and damages. We could easily file for 60 or even 65,000. I felt dizzy. "James, I don't want to destroy my son's life. He made mistakes. He raised a hand gently. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is stop shielding their child from consequences. You lent money under a clear agreement. He violated that agreement. This is not cruelty, Mrs. Carter. It is accountability." His words stung because they were true. For years I had excused small slights, overlooked missed payments, endured Brianna's thinly veiled contempt, always in the name of family, of peace. But peace? At what cost? I forced myself to ask, "And Brianna?" "She is equally liable," he replied without hesitation. "Marital assets and debts are shared. The note was signed during their marriage, and the house was community property. Any lawsuit would name them both as defendants." The idea of dragging Brianna into court filled me with grim satisfaction, yet it also twisted my stomach with dread. "She'll turn this into a spectacle," I murmured. "She'll play the victim, cry to anyone who'll listen." James gave a dry smile. "Let her. Judges don't rule on tears. They rule on contracts." I exhaled, a long breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "What do I need to do?" "Document everything," he said crisply. "Every missed payment, every conversation. Gather your phone records, your emails, change the locks on your house, install cameras if you haven't already. Make it clear, legally and physically, that your boundaries are firm." I nodded. "I already changed the locks yesterday." "Good," he said, scribbling notes. "You're taking control. That's the first step." Silence fell for a moment. My eyes drifted to the shelves lined with law books, the certificates framed on the wall. This office felt like a fortress, and for the first time in weeks I felt safe. But safety was not enough. "James," I said quietly. There's something else. My neighbors witnessed Brianna hitting me. The police filed a report. Does that matter legally? Absolutely, he said firmly. It shows a pattern of hostility and gives weight to your credibility. If her attorney tries to paint you as a vindictive mother-in-law, we will have documented evidence to the contrary. My throat tightened. So you really think we can win? I don't take cases I can't win, he replied simply. For a long moment I stared at him, the weight of decades pressing on my shoulders, all the nights I had gone without to give Mark more, all the little humiliations I had swallowed for the sake of harmony. And here I was, 64 years old, about to sue my own son and his wife. I'll do it, I said finally, my voice steady. File the lawsuit. James gave a slow nod, as though he had been waiting for me to say those words. Very well. I'll have the paperwork drafted this afternoon. I stood to leave, but he added gently, One more thing, Mrs. Carter. Prepare yourself. When people like Brianna lose control, they escalate. She will come at you emotionally, socially, maybe even legally. But you have the law on your side. Don't let her shake you. I nodded, gripping my purse tighter. I won't. As I stepped back into the bright October sun, I felt a strange mix of dread and relief. Dread for the storm I knew was coming. Relief that, for once, I was no longer standing unarmed in the wind. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the documents spread before me. The numbers, the signatures, the lien. It was all there, black and white, unshakable. For decades I had believed that love meant sacrifice, that motherhood meant shielding. But love without boundaries is not love at all. It is surrender. And I would not surrender anymore. Still, even as I gathered my strength, a question haunted me. What else had Brianna been hiding? What other secrets lay buried beneath her polished exterior, waiting to surface? I would soon learn the answers, and they would shake me even more than the slap on my porch. I thought a lawsuit would be the hardest step, but when the private investigator uncovered the truth about Brianna, I realized the betrayal went far deeper than money. When James Crawford told me he was bringing in a private investigator, my first instinct was discomfort. Hiring someone to dig through the life of my own daughter-in-law felt sordid. I was raised to believe family matters stayed private, handled quietly, behind closed doors. But closed doors had gotten me here. A bruised cheek, a stolen loan, and a son so beaten down by manipulation he couldn't lift his head. So I agreed. If we're going to fight, I told James, then I want the truth, all of it. 2 weeks later, I found myself back in his office. My stomach knotted. James was there, of course, but beside him sat a wiry man in his early 50s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. His handshake was brief, firm, professional. Mrs. Carter, he said, my name's Daniel Price. I've been looking into Brianna Mitchell's financial activities. Even hearing her last name attached to mine still stung. He pulled out a thick manila folder and set it on the desk. James gave me a nod, encouraging me to listen. Let's start with the so-called boutique, Daniel said. He slid a few papers toward me, state business registry records. No license, no tax filings, no storefront lease. As far as the state of Ohio is concerned, this boutique does not exist. The words hit me like cold water. So the $300,000 she claimed to invest, gone, Daniel interrupted, transferred directly into an account belonging to a woman named Melissa Grant. She and Brianna have been friends since college. Melissa has a history of short-lived ventures, pop-up shops, online sales, but nothing legitimate. In plain language, Mrs. Carter, your daughter-in-law gave $300,000 to a scam. I pressed a hand to my chest. My breath came shallow. I had half expected carelessness, but this was worse. Deliberate fraud. Daniel continued, flipping through documents. Before her marriage to your son, Brianna was engaged twice. Both fiancés broke it off after discovering she'd been using their credit cards without permission. In one case, she racked up more than $50,000 in debt before being caught. I closed my eyes. How could Mark not have known? She's skilled at covering her tracks, Daniel said gently, as if reading my mind. But there's more. For the past 6 months, she's been having an affair with a man named Richard Hawthorne. Wealthy, married, owns a construction company in Franklin County. My throat closed. She told him she was separated, Daniel went on, sliding photographs across the desk. Grainy images of Brianna in expensive restaurants, stepping into a black Mercedes, laughing with a tall man in a tailored suit. He paid for jewelry, vacations, and hotel rooms. In fact, several of the charges your son assumed were hers, California spas, luxury car detailing, were covered by this man as part of the affair. I couldn't look at the photos anymore. I turned them face down, shame crawling hot up my neck. Daniel's voice softened. Mrs. Carter, I know this is painful, but you need to understand. Your son has been targeted. This woman has been systematically draining him, financially, emotionally, for years. He is not weak. He is trapped. Tears blurred my vision. For so long I'd seen only Mark's silence, his passivity. I'd wondered where the boy I raised had gone. Now I realized he hadn't disappeared. He'd been smothered. James cleared his throat, leaning forward. This information strengthens your case considerably, not just in civil court, but potentially criminal. Fraud, conversion, marital waste. Brianna is vulnerable on multiple fronts. I wiped my eyes with a tissue from James's desk. What about Mark? If this goes to trial, won't he be humiliated? Won't everyone know? James's gaze softened. Yes, but sometimes humiliation is the first step toward freedom. And Mrs. Carter, your son needs freedom more than he needs comfort. I nodded slowly. For years I'd been protecting Mark from discomfort, cushioning him from life's sharp edges. But now I saw. My protection had become a cage. When I left the office that afternoon, the folder of evidence clutched to my chest. The autumn air felt heavier, darker. I sat in my car for nearly an hour before I could drive. Images of Brianna laughing with Richard, of credit card bills spiraling, of $300,000 funneled into a phantom boutique. They swirled in my mind like a storm I couldn't escape. That evening, Mark called. His voice was thin, frayed. Mom, Brianna made bail. She's back at the motel. We don't know what to do. I gripped the phone tighter. Mark, I said carefully, we need to meet. Tomorrow. At James Crawford's office. I have something you need to see. Is it bad? He asked, his voice breaking. It's worse than you think, I said softly. But it may be the beginning of you getting your life back. When I hung up, I stared out the window at my darkened street. The roses in my garden were withering with the season, their petals curling, their colors fading, but they would bloom again in the spring. They always did, and maybe, just maybe, so would my son. Still, one thought gnawed at me as I prepared for bed. How would Mark react when he learned the full extent of his wife's betrayal? Would this evidence free him, or destroy what little strength he had left? I thought seeing the evidence would open my son's eyes. But when Mark finally sat across from me in James's office, the truth broke him in ways I hadn't expected. The next afternoon, James Crawford's office felt heavier, as if the walls themselves knew the weight of what was about to unfold. I arrived early, clutching the folder of evidence like it was both a shield and a burden. James greeted me with his steady calm, offering me tea I was too nervous to drink. When Mark finally walked in, my heart clenched. My son looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. His clothes hung loosely on him, his eyes shadowed by dark circles. This was not the strong young man I'd once watched walk across the stage at his college graduation. This was a hollowed-out version of him, barely held together. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, taking the seat across from me. "Hi, sweetheart," I whispered. James sat behind his desk, legal pad at the ready. "Mark, thank you for coming. There are some things you need to see." Mark glanced between us, suspicion flickering in his tired eyes. "Is this about the lawsuit?" "It's about more than that," James said gently. "It's about the truth." Daniel Price, the investigator, entered then, carrying the same thick folder he had shown me. He nodded politely to Mark, then began laying documents on the desk one by one. "Let's start with the boutique," Daniel said. "The business your wife claimed to invest $300,000 in." Mark's brow furrowed. "Yes, she said it was a great opportunity." "There is no boutique," Daniel said flatly. "No license, no storefront, no business filings. The money went straight into an account owned by her friend, Melissa Grant. A scam." Mark blinked, shaking his head. "That can't be right." Brianna said. "She lied," Daniel interrupted gently. He slid forward copies of the transfers, account numbers, signatures. Mark's hands trembled as he picked up the pages. 300,000, his voice cracked. "Gone?" "Yes," Daniel confirmed. I wanted to reach across the desk, to hold his hand like I had when he was little, but I forced myself to stay still. He needed the truth, not cushioning. Daniel continued. "Before she married you, Brianna was engaged twice. Both men ended the relationship after discovering she had used their credit cards without permission. Over $50,000 in one case. It's a pattern." Mark's lips parted, but no words came out. He dropped the papers back on the desk as though they burned. "And then," Daniel said quietly, "there is this." He placed a series of photographs on the desk, grainy but undeniable. Brianna in restaurants, at hotels, stepping into a black Mercedes with a tall man in a suit. Mark's face went white. "His name is Richard Hawthorne," Daniel explained. "Married, wealthy, owner of a construction firm. He has been in a relationship with your wife for at least 6 months. He paid for jewelry, vacations, spa trips. Many of the expenses you believed were hers alone were, in fact, funded as part of this affair." "No," Mark whispered, shaking his head violently. "No, she wouldn't." "She did," Daniel said firmly. "We have receipts, credit card records, hotel bills. It's all here." Mark pushed back from the desk, covering his face with his hands. His shoulders shook. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was his muffled sobbing. My chest ached to see him like that. My son, my pride, my joy, reduced to tears by betrayal he couldn't yet comprehend. I finally broke my stillness. I rose from my chair and placed a hand on his back. "Oh, Mark," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." He looked up, eyes red and wet. How could she? How could she do this to me? To us? James leaned forward, his voice calm but steady. "Mark, what Brianna has done is devastating, but what matters now is what you choose to do next." Mark swallowed hard, staring at the photographs again. His jaw tightened. For the first time in years, I saw something spark in his eyes, a flicker of resolve. "I'll pay back the loan," he said suddenly, turning to me. "Every cent, Mom, with interest. You shouldn't have to sue me. I'll make it right." Tears pricked my own eyes, but I kept my voice steady. "Mark, This isn't just about money. It's about the choices you make now. He nodded slowly. I know. He took a deep breath, wiping his face with his sleeve. I'm filing for divorce. Today. The room went still. James nodded approvingly. That's a wise decision. I can refer you to an excellent family attorney. Mark shook his head. I should have seen this sooner. I ignored every red flag. She convinced me to sell the house. She spent everything. She lied about debts. And I let it happen. His voice broke again. I let her turn me against you. I gripped his hand tightly. She manipulated you, Mark. That's what people like her do. You're not weak. You were trapped. But you're taking steps now. That's what matters. He looked at me with fresh tears. I don't deserve your forgiveness. You're my son, I whispered. You'll always deserve my love. Forgiveness will come with time and responsibility. James cleared his throat gently. Mark, there's one more thing we need to discuss. In the early years of your marriage, there are some irregularities in your financial paperwork, tax filings, loan applications. Mark's face flushed. He nodded slowly. Yes, I inflated my income once to get a car loan. I left out some cash earnings on our taxes one year. Brianna told me everyone did it, that it was no big deal. He swallowed hard. She kept copies of everything. She said it was just for our records, but now I realize it was leverage. I felt my stomach drop. James was calm. Voluntary disclosure is the safest path. If you admit it now, you neutralize her ability to blackmail you later. It will be painful, fines, maybe job consequences, but survivable. Mark buried his face in his hands. I can't believe I let it get this far. I squeezed his arm. It's not too late, son. The important thing is what you do now. He nodded, exhaling shakily. Then I'll do it. I'll tell the truth. To the court, to the IRS, to whoever needs to hear it. I'd rather face consequences than keep living under her shadow. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Real, tangible hope. My son, broken as he was finally choosing honesty over deception, courage over fear. As we left the office, walking side by side, Mark paused by my car. He turned to me, his face weary but resolute. Mom, I'm going to spend the rest of my life making this right. I touched his cheek, the way I had when he was a little boy, trembling after a nightmare. You already are, sweetheart. You already are. Still, as I drove home, a chilling thought followed me. Brianna would not go quietly, and when she struck back, she would strike hard. I thought the divorce would free him. But in the courtroom, Brianna turned her lies into weapons and tried to paint me as the villain. I thought the divorce would free him. But in the courtroom, Brianna turned her lies into weapons and tried to paint me as the villain. Courtrooms have a smell, old wood polish, recycled air, and the faint tang of anxiety that lingers no matter how many cases are heard each week. I'd only been in one a handful of times before, mostly for jury duty, but never like this. Never with my own son sitting beside me, never with my daughter-in-law across the aisle, staring at me as if I were the enemy. Mark and I sat behind James Crawford at the plaintiff's table. He was calm as always, flipping through his neatly tabbed binder. I tried to mimic his composure, folding my hands in my lap, but my pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. Mark looked pale, his jaw tight, but there was a steadiness in him I hadn't seen in years. Across from us, Brianna was the picture of perfection. Her hair gleamed, her makeup was flawless, her navy dress modest yet expensive. At her side was her attorney, a sharply dressed woman named Sarah Chen, who radiated confidence. It was clear Brianna had rehearsed this performance. She was ready to play her part, The wronged wife, the misunderstood daughter-in-law, the victim of a vindictive older woman. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Patricia Harris entered. A woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a bun, she carried the authority of someone who had seen every kind of human drama play out in her courtroom. We rose, sat, and the trial began. Sarah Chen went first. She spoke smoothly, almost musically, painting Brianna as a woman trapped in an impossible situation. "My client," she said, "is the target of relentless harassment by her mother-in-law. Mrs. Carter never accepted her into the family. She has now weaponized the legal system to punish Brianna for personal dislike." I could feel my neighbors' imagined whispers, even though they weren't there. How many times had I heard women like me called bitter, jealous, unable to let go of their sons? Chen continued, "Yes, financial decisions were made, imperfect ones, as many young couples make, but this lawsuit is not about money, it's about control." Brianna dabbed delicately at her eyes with a tissue, the very picture of a suffering angel. When it was James's turn, his voice carried none of Chen's theatrics. He was deliberate, methodical, like a craftsman laying brick by brick. He laid out the promissory note, signed, dated, notarized. He explained the lien against the property. He documented 3 years of missed payments despite repeated reminders. He detailed the sale of the house without satisfying the debt. "This is not a family squabble," James told the judge. "It is a clear breach of contract and conversion of secured property." Next came the police report. The assault on my porch, witnessed by half the neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson had even come to testify. She stood bravely at the witness stand, her voice unwavering as she described how Brianna had struck me. Brianna's composure cracked then, just slightly, a flash of anger, quickly smoothed over. And then James called a surprise witness, Richard Hawthorne. When the tall man in a tailored suit entered the courtroom, Brianna's face drained of color. Richard looked uncomfortable, almost pained, but he swore his oath and sat. Under questioning, he admitted to a 6-month affair with Brianna. He confirmed paying for jewelry, vacations, and hotel rooms. He testified that she had told him she was separated, that she needed help maintaining her lifestyle. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sarah Chen tried to object, arguing the affair was irrelevant, but Judge Harris overruled her. "It speaks to the dissipation of marital assets," the judge said firmly. By the time Richard left the stand, Brianna's mask was shattered. She sat rigid, lips pressed tight, eyes darting as though searching for escape. James pressed on, showing bank records of the supposed boutique investment. Money funneled straight into Melissa Grant's account. No business license, no storefront, no evidence of legitimate trade. Finally, he presented a timeline of spending, $620,000 gone in under 6 months. Jewelry, designer clothes, luxury cars, spa retreats, all meticulously documented. When James rested his case, the courtroom was silent. Judge Harris leaned forward. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, addressing Brianna directly, "do you dispute that you signed this promissory note agreeing to repay Mrs. Carter $40,000? Brianna hesitated. "No, Your Honor, but..." "Do you dispute that you failed to make any payments on this note for 3 years? The circumstances. Do you dispute that you and your husband sold the house securing this loan without satisfying the debt?" Her attorney tried to interject, but the judge cut her off. "Sit down, counselor. I'm speaking to your client." Brianna looked cornered. "I didn't understand the legal implications." "You're 32 years old," the judge said sternly. "Are you claiming you didn't understand that borrowing money meant you had to pay it back?" Brianna's voice faltered. "It wasn't supposed to be a real loan. It was family money. The judge's eyes hardened. Family or not, a contract is a contract. An assault is assault. This court does not excuse fraud and violence simply because the victim is related by marriage. The gavel of justice was coming down, and I could feel it. When Judge Harris delivered her ruling, her voice was steady and clear. I find in favor of the plaintiff. Mrs. Brianna Mitchell is ordered to repay Mrs. Evelyn Carter the sum of $67,000, representing principal, interest, attorney's fees, and damages, within 30 days. Furthermore, this matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for review of potential criminal fraud charges. Brianna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Sarah Chen leaned in, whispering urgently, but the damage was done. I sat still, hardly daring to breathe. Beside me, Mark closed his eyes, relief and devastation mingling on his face. As the gavel struck, echoing through the small courtroom, I realized something. I had not only won a case, I had reclaimed my dignity. Still, as we gathered our papers and rose to leave, a chill ran down my spine. Brianna's glare followed me, cold and venomous. And I knew. This battle might be over, but the war was not. I thought the judge's ruling would end the nightmare. But Brianna wasn't done with me. She showed up at my doorstep again, more desperate than ever. I thought the judge's ruling would end the nightmare. But Brianna wasn't done with me. She showed up at my doorstep again, more desperate than ever. The day after the ruling, I thought perhaps the air would feel lighter. But when I stepped onto my porch with a cup of tea, I noticed the roses drooping, heavy with the chill of late autumn. The sky was gray, the neighborhood quiet. But inside me there was a storm still brewing. Judge Harris's decision had given me legal victory, but Brianna's venomous stare in the courtroom told me this wasn't over. I was right. 3 mornings later, at 6 o'clock sharp, pounding rattled my front door. I peered through the peephole and saw Brianna, her hair disheveled, mascara smeared, wearing yesterday's clothes. She looked nothing like the polished woman in court. She looked desperate. "Evelyn," she screamed, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "You ruined my life. Open this door right now." I pressed the intercom button on my new security system, my voice calm. "Brianna, leave my property immediately." She beat the door harder. "You think you've won? You think a stupid judge can stop me? You destroyed my marriage. You turned my husband against me." Across the street, I saw Mrs. Patterson's curtains twitch. A porch light flicked on next door. My neighbors were listening. Again. "You have 30 seconds to leave," I said firmly, "or I'll call the police." "Good," she shrieked. "Call them. Let them see how cruel you are. You'll die alone in this ugly house, bitter and jealous. Everyone needs to know who you really are." She turned and shouted into the quiet street. "This woman turned her own son against his wife. She spies on us. She sues her own family. She's a monster." I dialed 911. "This is Evelyn Carter on Elm Street. The woman who assaulted me is back, trespassing and disturbing the peace." As I spoke, Brianna pounded harder, her voice hoarse now. "You think you're safe? You're not. I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." When the police car finally pulled up, her performance turned theatrical. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing. "Please don't arrest me again. I have nowhere to go. She's destroying me." Officer Martinez, the same young woman who had come before, kept her tone professional. "Mrs. Mitchell, you've been warned. You cannot return here. Leave now, or you'll be arrested for trespassing." "But I don't have anywhere else," Brianna wailed. "That is not Mrs. Carter's problem," Martinez said firmly. I watched from the window as Brianna was escorted to her car. Even in her breakdown, she shot me a look of pure hatred, a promise. When they finally drove her away, I sagged against the wall, exhausted. That evening, Mark called. His voice was steadier than it had been in months. "Mom, I'm sorry she came again. I told her to stay away. I can't control her anymore." "You're not responsible for her actions, Mark," I said softly. "Only for your own." He hesitated, then added, "I've started making payments to James for the loan. It'll take me years, but I'll pay you back every cent." My eyes welled. "It's not just about the money, son. It's about you choosing responsibility. That means more than a check ever could." Weeks passed. The case wound its way toward criminal review, but I stopped following every twist. I had changed the locks, installed cameras, fortified my home, and more importantly, my heart. I no longer jumped at the sound of tires in the driveway. Instead, I started looking forward. I sold the house in Ohio, the one I'd spent 3 decades paying off, the one that held both roses and painful memories. With the proceeds, I bought a modest condo in Arizona, in a retirement community with views of the mountains. Warm days, cool nights, a garden club where women traded cuttings of lavender and rosemary. For the first time since my husband died, I felt at peace. Mark found steady work in Chicago, and twice a month he flew out to visit. He was thinner, yes, but lighter somehow, like a man slowly shedding chains. Over coffee on my new patio, he told me about budgeting, about saving for the first time in years. "Mom," he said once, looking out at the mountains, "it feels good to know exactly what I have. No secrets, no lies, just honesty. It's hard, but it's freeing." And I realized then, the money was gone, but my son was back. That was worth more than any check. One evening, just as the desert sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, my neighbor Margaret called over the fence, "Evelyn, there's a young woman at your door. She looks upset." My stomach tightened, but when I opened the door, it wasn't Brianna. It was a girl in her 20s, with tired eyes and a resemblance I couldn't miss. "My name is Jennifer," she said softly. "I'm Brianna's sister. May I talk to you?" I hesitated, then nodded. We sat on my patio, and she told me her story. "Brianna is in Florida now using another name," Jennifer said. "She's engaged to a wealthy man, spinning the same lies she spun with Mark. I've tried to warn people, but she's convincing. You're the only one who's ever stood up to her and won. Please, how did you do it?" I poured her tea, the desert air cooling as the stars emerged. I told her everything: the contracts, the documentation, the cameras, the courage to say no, the strength to call the police even when it broke my heart. "The key," I told her finally, "is remembering you can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. All you can do is protect yourself and the ones you love. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're survival." Jennifer listened, nodding, tears slipping down her cheeks. After she left, I stayed on the patio, gazing at the Arizona sky. The roses here were different, hardier, adapted to the desert, but they bloomed just the same. So had I. I wasn't richer, but I was freer. I had my dignity, my son, and a new chapter opening before me. And to the women like me, sitting in living rooms across America, listening to this story, I would say this: it is never too late, not to draw a line, not to say no, not to start over.